Okay, it's been a long day, a long hot day, and this is our last panel. So I'm just going to introduce the panel quickly, ask them a little bit about their background. Really, what we want to do is figure out here, the motivations and results from licensing, and if people are developers, how they might get into game licensing or licensing in IP to use with their titles. We've Christian from Gamejam, or not from Gamejam, from Gamejam in the middle. We've Dylan from ZeptoLab.
Hello.
We have Mao from DeNA, and just if you could give me a quick background, Dylan. You've actually got a really interesting background in terms of licensing, having worked with some companies I think we've all heard of, including Rovio and Disney. Love to hear about how you've kind of gotten to where you are and your thoughts on licensed content.
Sure, although I've only now really properly worked with licenses at the project level. My background is as a product manager and analyst. I started my career at Disney, then worked with Rovio Publishing for 3 years at the game team level. And now at ZeptoLab, I'm in charge of publishing and basically getting our IP in other games, which definitely includes licensing.
Christian, Ketchup and Dots before. Is this working in Gamejam? Is this your first time working with licensed IP?
It's not my first time, but it's probably my most engaging time working with licensed IP.
Okay, and you're working with DJ Marshmallow. Had I read that recently?
Yes, yeah, we are.
Excellent. Okay, well, we're going to come back to that in a moment. Mao, I think we've heard of DeNA before, and have a small, I think, licensing tie-up, which we won't have to ask you about, with a small company called Nintendo. But you're also involved in a lot of other licensed content. I think we were reading about Bleach recently.
Yeah, we recently launched the Bleach game in China, Korea, TC market in Southeast Asia, which got a pretty good feedback from the audience and fans. Yeah, so we mainly work with Japanese animations, adaptation games.
Okay, who's heard of Bleach? Everybody heard of Bleach? Yeah, it's a huge IP, right? Do you think in this sort of case that Bleach has made a significant impact to DeNA's business? I mean, is the brand a huge part of the launch?
Yes and no. This is actually the second Bleach game we launched so far with DeNA China for China market and overseas market. To be honest, the first one didn't come out really well, even though that's actually the first Bleach game ever come out in China mainland, but that one didn't work out very well. But the second one, on the other hand, has come out really well, like I think almost 10 times annual in sales number comparing to the first one. So basically, yes, the IP is a big plus when we promote this game this time, but it is also not the only factor that will impact the fact.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So you have effectively the first Bleach game ever to come out, but it wasn't the sort of success that you'd expect. So the brand didn't move the game in its own right.
Well, if you're comparing to a non-IP related game, of course it got a much bigger MAU base back then, but it didn't last. It gave you the attraction for the new users for 1 week, 2 weeks, but afterwards it will drop rapidly. So after all, it still come back to the basic games, if that's a good game or not.
Okay, interesting. Christian, you want to tell us a little bit about DJ Marshmallow and the sort of impact that has had on your business?
Yeah, sure. So we started working with Mello on this game. He wanted to be the first artist to premiere an album in a game. So, for example, to listen to Joytime 3, before it came out to the public, you had to play our game and listen to the album. And so we worked with their team on that to make that happen, and it's been really fun. It's been awesome. We all love Marshmallow's music at the office, and so it's really fun to work on a project that you really enjoy, and the whole team's really excited about it. I think to me that it brings like the company happiness level up. Sometimes making games can be quite stressful, especially when you have to hit a hard deadline. And so we've just been having a blast working on this game. Their team has been great to work with. So yeah, we're just really happy about it.
couple of add-on questions onto that. What sort of a lead time did you have ahead? Like, how long was the album available exclusively, effectively, in the game for?
24 hours.
Oh, okay.
So for 24 hours, you could, the 24 hours before it was released, you could listen to the album in our game.
So you were getting the super fans.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was people who really wanted to listen to the album, and anyone was really interested in hearing it before it came out. Yeah.
I think one of the dangers, though, is if you are super fans yourselves, you can kind of get caught up in an IP bubble. Were you not worried at some point that maybe the rest of the world didn't like Marshmallow as much as you guys did?
He's got a pretty strong following. Like, I think he's like, if you look at his alone song on YouTube, it's got like 1 billion views. Okay. His music is pretty like broadly appealing. In Fortnite, he did a Fortnite concert. He was the first DJ ever to do a live concert in a game in Fortnite, and I think that had like 50 million plus views. Yeah. Like, it's just, these are just really big numbers where, yeah, I think the audience is really large.
So you backed up your instincts with analysis of the IP.
Kind of. I think when picking like a partner to work with from an IP perspective, to me, like those big numbers like that really matter.
Okay. Yeah. And Dylan, with an analyst's hat on, approaching licensing, looking at it in terms of potential impact on a game, like I have seen, and in fact I've fallen prey to it myself, excitement about an IP displacing sort of rational belief. Are there tools and techniques that you would use if you were looking at IP to say, okay, this is something we should measure, something we should, we think we'll have a better than ordinary chance of success if we go with this?
Yeah, the first step is humility, because what you just described, this point where you fall in love with an idea, it doesn't matter how experienced you are, it still happens. So what you have to do is engineer processes that can mitigate that risk as much as possible. For example, one game we did, because it all comes down to the audience match, right? And it's not, at least I don't think it's possible for any expert to know that on paper. Like if you take all the games that I've seen, the value that the brand adds, it's a very disparate outcomes. Even if you exclude the ones that were wonderfully done or terribly done, like the idea that someone can just know whether it's going to be small, medium, big impact, I think is kind of silly. So one of the processes that we'll take is kind of a staged thing, where first we'll run like a split metrics test with like 2 fake ad campaigns, generic game, then game with the brand. These are not the greatest analytical tools, but they're cheap, and it's a start. And then, if it's a higher risk project, then we'll do what we call an alpha launch. So you take a prototype of the game, rebrand the game with the IP. It's only like a day or 2 of content. You release that, and then you can get a better measurement of D1 and CPI and conversion. You don't want to trick yourself into believing these are perfect tools. At ZeptoLab, we've seen, especially split metrics tests, that do not scale at all. You have the best result, and then in soft launch, it's totally the opposite. But at least it's something. And our approach is, whenever there's the farther away, and you have to be very conservative about it, between the audience for your IP and the audience that's proven for that game type, the more you have to try to mitigate it. But it's always there. You're always falling in love with visions and these sort of things, and there's always the high possibility that that audience match is just not going to work.
Yeah, but you're assuming that you've actually licensed the game at that point, right? So what happens if you've made a mistake? I mean, is there any way that you can tell before you go into licensing a game whether you think you're getting into the right IP?
Oh, no, we structure the deal so that there's a lot of outs.
Okay.
So in the beginning, it's the split metric. Well, we don't sign the deal before the split metrics test, but the alpha launch is an actual contract. And then we usually set retention targets at the end of soft launch. They're not necessarily built around profitability, but at least it protects us from releasing something embarrassing. That's really the thing we're worried about. Like, if the game isn't profitable and we just have to release it, but it's high quality and nice, then, well, whatever. It's a little bit of opportunity cost, but no harm done. The thing that we're really scared of, and really it infects every decision from the whole chain of review, is, are we going to be forced to release something that is going to hurt our reputation? And this is like, it's the elephant in every room, in every discussion.
Yeah, any thoughts on that, Mao?
Yeah. Because basically we work with Japanese animation IPs. So basically, you get a large number of selections to choose from. So what we do is that analysis the obvious, like Google Trends or Baidu Trends for China market, for example. But that's not the only factor we would consider, because if you name the biggest Japanese animations, a lot of them have been running for a decade, 20 years, or even more. So basically, even Google wouldn't track the data back that long. So some of the IP has really good potential, but if you look at the nowadays numbers, it's not big enough. So that way, we would look into, say online video media or game libraries or animation libraries to look at actually how many people has viewed that animation in the past. And to see, actually, say it's a 10 episode animation. How many people watched the first one, but continue to watch the second one, and continue to the last one? So to approve that the IP actually has a lawyer base, and how big is the lawyer base on the bottom. And that would determine if we want to take the game and if we have the good team to actually produce the game. Like I said, some IP are really old. So basically, the audience, the game you made will be for the audience that's generally in a, say, for gamers, 30, 40 will be a pretty, senior gamers. But some IPs like Seven Deadly Sin or, for example, Fate, which is a huge successful game in the last couple of years, will be facing the audience, say, 20 years old or even less. So basically, we would do those researches beforehand. One hand is to see how much audience it actually have and what kind of audience will be suitable for. And if we are, as a developer, will be capable to produce a game that the specific audience would love. Yeah.
Okay. So interesting. A combination of heart plus analysis. And Google Trends, by the way, is one of the most useful resources that's out there just for doing quick checks on relative performance of IP. You'll never get the absolute numbers. It's excellent service. But so you've found your IP that you want. Maybe somebody's already made a game, or it mightn't be available to you. How do you actually go about licensing? It seems like a very obvious question, but there was a point that I got to when I was kind of scratching my head saying, okay, our original IP isn't doing so well anymore. We got to license something. How do we do it? How do you do it? What do you do? What are the first steps?
I think the key is to be experienced.
So you've got no experience. So let's say we've got no experience. What do you do?
Don't license. Sorry, but I mean, maybe it's just because our organization is super conservative, but it's actually sometimes heartbreaking when you see younger studios, younger people with great games, but you think, all right, are we really going to take the risk that they can handle this? Can they run a business, right? Can they, maybe they have 4 or 5 friends that work well together, but what happens if a key person leaves? How well are they going to be able to replace an engineer? Or if they have to hire 2 or 3 more people, do they have experience with that sort of thing? Avoiding those risks is wonderful, and you have options. So, in my opinion, if you don't have at least your leads, right? It's not necessarily, maybe the company is new, but at least if the head of tech, design, and art have worked together in a lot of other places, then it would kind of be okay. But to license, at least IPs that I know and have worked in, to studios without expertise seems a bit silly, because that's the whole thesis of it, is that they have some expertise that's so valuable. It's not just that you're outsourcing the work and the head count. It's that they have expertise that you don't have.
For us, we get a lot of inbound interest, and we're turning down more licensing deals and accepting. And I think it's just like like you may really love the IP, or it may be a really good idea, but I think at the end of the day, you need like three things. One is, from a marketability perspective, it has to reduce your cost of distribution. On the flip side, like it should somehow increase your LTV capacity, right? So your ROI should go up from taking this on. And the third thing is it has to be meaningful for the IP that you're licensing in some way, right? It's not just a revenue opportunity for them. It has to have some kind of meaningful impact for us, at least. And so we're looking to like evaluating these opportunities where we can do something really cool and special. So we find ourselves turning down more opportunities than others, and we've made mistakes in the past where, like, for example, we'll work with an artist. He's got a great hit song, but it's like a one-hit wonder, and like, you know, that the time to develop that game takes a little bit longer than and the development cycle, and that song's come up, but it's now starting to trend down. Artist doesn't have another hit song, so by the time you release the game, it's not going to have that big of an impact. There are a lot of variables like this in place, and so I find most of the time it's better to kind of turn things down until you feel like there's something that really has a strong opportunity. Doing testing like these guys, I think, is important and to help with that. But then also just like fundamentally like thinking about, is this big enough to really make an impact for everyone?
One option is if you do have an existing game that has live events in the game, you could offer the licensor to, like for free, run an event in your game and share the data. And that way you can show, like, so usually our live events have this impact, and then with your IP it had this impact. So with our audience, with the game that we know and are already doing pretty well with, we can really clearly show something. And that's very easy to agree to, because it's not like a brand risk, you know what I mean? Like, as long as the game is kind of decent, then whatever. So that's actually something we've done as a licensor. Like, you approach someone like, well, we're not really sure. Okay, like, run a live event, you know, just take everything for free, just share the data, and that way it makes it a lot easier to go forward. But of course, not every game works for that sort of thing, but that is one potential option.
Yeah, I would agree with Dylan on the first one. If you don't have enough time and resource and everything, just don't hold your breath on IP licensing. It's just too much time and resource consuming. Taking the licensing from Japanese animation, for example, is that basically you have to get into the circle, for sure, first, because there's only certain big licensors in Japan, namely Bandai Namco or Shueisha or Kodansha. Just, you know, there's like less than 10. So basically know each other very well. They know who they should license to, and there's only so many like valuable IPs they have. So basically each IP has been licensed before. So what we do is we have to get into the circle, get to know what they're doing, what they're thinking, what their goal is for the next year, and plan for maybe something would happen. The license would happen next year. So if you plus development time, that would be something would happen in 3 or 4 years' time, considering nowadays development time frame. So basically, you get in there and you wait for what we call the licensing window. So if they licensed a game already this year, so you have to wait for, say, another year, 1 year or 3 months before they start licensing again. Then you jump in there, give your best offer, and like I said, if your game proposal will appear to the licensor that it would actually help the brand to become a long-living brand in their target audience. Say for example, Bleach. You make what we do is an action game for Bleach, which is the obvious choice. But you make a female game based on that. Probably that would be a wrong choice, or maybe a right choice, because, well, anyway. So after all, that's what I say. I agree to Dylan. Just don't hold your breath on that. If you get a good opportunity, it's right in front of you. Consider if that's a good option for your own game and your own company. But if you rely on just do IP games, then be prepared. The business will take you another 5 years or 10 years to actually succeed.
So it's something you have to be fully committed to it. You go in with your eyes wide open. We'll talk about the economics of it in a moment, but you don't necessarily have to be a huge company to do it. I mean, you guys are big. You guys are big-ish. You guys are less than 10 people in your studio?
Yeah, less than 10 people.
We're 30 odd people. So you don't have to be a huge studio. You don't necessarily have to be massively resourced, but you have to be committed. And you have to understand that it's a very different process developing a game and working with the licensor than it is on your own clock. Approvals processes can delay you. Crazy third-party rights can delay you. Last-minute changes can delay you. So really understand what you're getting into, and don't go into it on an under-resourced basis. But you don't have to be huge to get into licensing. Just coming back to one point, I think the economics of licensing, and one of the things on this panel is that we've said we want to look at, does it contribute to success? I think the fact that we're all here talking about it means that it can contribute to success. But what are the sort of typical license economics? Do you pay money up front to buy a license, or do you pay just a revenue share, or how does it work?
It depends. I would say, if my understanding is that the big brands all ask for a lot of cash up front, but probably just because they can. Personally, I don't like it, just because, at least I fought against that being a requirement for us, just because it limits the pool of developers. I think in terms of outcomes at scale, it really much more depends on just getting good teams to work with you. So by having that requirement, you're just limiting your pool, which in the big picture I think would have not the best outcome. But I mean, I guess when you have like Star Wars, you can ask for that, and it's probably kind of worth it, because it has a huge impact. But personally, I think it's just short-term thinking. But I don't know. I couldn't claim that's super analytical. That conclusion.
Yeah, I think when you're getting in those conversations too, you're dealing with like a salesperson, and it's hard to get them to sometimes understand the possible outcomes for what you can accomplish together. For us, I don't think paying, unless it's for a brand like Star Wars, paying an MG is helpful for the developer or even for the IP. I think it's a more meaningful model would be something around like a rev share for both parties.
For us, the past experience would be some upfront payment, maybe as a license fee, which is non-refundable. Some will be as a minimum guarantee, which will be recouped in the future when the game's launched, and plus a revenue share model in the long run. So basically, based on individuals, will depend on different licensors. Will think different. Some will consider as an opportunity to actually grow their brand bigger. So basically, they would ask for like a small amount of upfront payment, or potentially ask for higher percentage of revenue share because they believe the game going to be bigger. So it's numbers. So by their calculation, they believe the future sales will be big, so they will ask for a higher revenue share. Basically, they get more money. But some of them will be asking for more upfront payment, but less revenue share afterwards. Basically, that shows kind of a belief they have in their IP is, or in the developer, that if you will be able to produce a game that's good enough. If you're not, okay, I'll take some money upfront. If the game's good, bam, everybody's lucky. But if not, I didn't lose anything. So I think basically have a good game design proposal, approach the licensor you want to get IP from, and convince them that your product and their IP can make 1 + 1 more than 2. I think you will be able to get a better deal. That everybody's betting on the future, not the short-time thing.
Yeah, I have to agree. Now we would pay significant minimum guarantees every year to certain licensors. But they wouldn't be at the range that we've been asked for at some point. We had a big licensor at one point ask us for a forecast, which of course we produced a 3-year potential forecast, and then ask us for half of that 3-year forecast as an upfront. And we say no, that's crazy because we're financially crippled, instantly, and we don't see you committed to the long-term future. Whereas some of the best licensing relationships that we've had have come out of friendships that developed, and then, hey, let's work together, and a very, very productive scenario where both organizations are committed to the one goal. So, and that was also in some ways reflected in the contract. The contract was much easier, short form agreement. If we fall out, we fall out, and we call a lawyer at that point. It was a nice way to do things. But I've seen some horrendous agreements and horrendous terms. What are the sort of terms you think, let's say, a smallish but committed developer needs to look out for in licensing contracts?
Having that discussion around a revenue projection sounds terrible.
Yeah.
Like, that is a terrible, and I say this as an ex-analyst, that is not what revenue projections are for. That's internal poker. That's not a negotiating tool, because it depends so much on context and expectations. Like, the fact that, that should just be an internal tool. To use that as an interplay between organizations, like, I would only use it if it was for a very junior team. If it wasn't for licensing and you just wanted to make sure they understood the math of the business and the main things, and they had like a general sense of project planning as a test for that. That seems silly.
Yeah, I think to answer your question, like, to me, just making sure that the agreement is symmetrical. When you're working with a lot of these bigger firms, the agreements are so asymmetrical, and obvious, it's sometimes correlated with the size of the agreement, and it just gets compounded in terms of like how much like liability you assume. For the projections, I think it just depends on who you're talking to. Like, if you're working with a sales guy who's like, he's incentivized by your MG, and he gets, then maybe showing him a revenue projection isn't the best idea. But if you're working with, I don't know, like an artist, and you can say, hey, like, these are some potential, like, obviously don't hold us to these numbers, and you can't hold us to these numbers in the contract, but like, this is like potentially what you could make. These are what comparable games make based on KPIs. I think that's fine, because like, at the end of the day, like, that's what you want to, that's your goal, that's your target anyways. But to answer your question, I think like the agreement has to be symmetrical, and I think the shorter the better. Making sure there's equal liability, exit out, outs for both parties if something goes wrong, and that there's not many ways for the licensor to basically take the game from you or something like that. I think those are
so can you expand on that? How would a licensor take a game from you?
I mean, it depends on the terms of the contract, but like, if they somehow have like a clause in there where they can own the code or own something like that.
That's crazy.
Yeah, the code. That's how they do it.
Yeah.
Like none of, the developer owns the code because of that.
You spend your money to license the IP. You spend your money to make the game, then you give them the game at the end after giving them half.
Well, it depends on how the deal is structured. But those are, things that I've seen. These contracts get over the years have gotten pretty bad. But like, to keep it simple, symmetrical, and short, I think is the best. Yeah.
I've even seen silly things where they don't let the developer talk about it. Right? We pretend that we made it ourselves, which is like the most ridiculous, because it's so not valuable to you, right? And so valuable to the developer. Like, we made this game, like, no one cares. You know what I mean? Like, that is, at least, it's probably not the biggest in terms of economic impact, but that's, in my opinion, like the most petty thing ever. Like, let's just pretend it was ours. Like, everyone knows it wasn't, or everyone that cares knows that you didn't make it internally. And you're taking away like a huge accomplishment from the team and everything. At least that one was one I had the strongest emotional reaction to. Like, come on, why would you do this to them? Like, just let them put their logo on this. Let them have a splash screen at the game start. Is that really having a material impact on our business by not doing that?
Yeah, for us it was huge when because we're a startup, right? So when we launch a game with an artist like Marshmallow and be able to do co-branding, it's really great for our company, and so I think it's really important that that you're able to obviously talk about, not supposed to talk about everything, but some things okay to talk about, and I think it's really important.
Yeah, you can be balanced about it. Like, ZeptoLab's very secretive about everything we have in soft launch, so you just say, okay, like in one-on-one biz dev discussion, sure, but just no press releases. You know what I mean? Like, And that way they can still capture most of the value of that partnership, and you're not putting anything at risk or whatever. There's always ways, unless if someone's being ridiculous, to meet most of your goals without, just being crazy and just overusing your power because you can. And it really, really has an impact. Like, the developer remembers for years when you do this. I don't want to get too specific. It's going to become clear what I'm talking about. But they will remember that you didn't let them do this, and that they had to be this way. And if you believe in the thesis that licensing is all about getting access to the best talent, then long term you're doing tremendous damage because small community, people know, if you're not cool to work with, and especially in this sort of petty way, when 3 years later, when you need access to more expertise, especially if it's really big IP, because those, you need really good places that have options, that are getting pinged with lots and lots of licenses. They have a choice. And if they know that you're going to be petty about small things, they're like, well, no, we'll just take one of the other options that we don't have to deal with that.
Great. Mao, anything to add on the point of working with them?
And I would just say for each case, each licensor will be different. But if I can think of one thing that's quite tricky, is that just give yourself enough time, because the project is always going to be delayed. And plus your content, your game, will need to go through the approval from the IP licensor. It's in line with their design, their concept. So your development process is going to be much longer. You plan for your 1 year's development, you may end up 2 years. So when you sign a contract, be prepared is going to be extended. So you better leave not a backdoor, but a possibility that if your development really gets longer than your expectation, don't make yourself into a situation that when you finally get the game come out, you have 1 month left actually for the licensor period.
Which is really, really important, because I've seen license agreements where developers have signed up to effectively unknown durations of development, but signed a development agreement that says your 3-year term starts on signature, not on launch, of the title. I've seen developers make mistakes like that. It's crazy.
Yeah, don't do movie games. No. Day and date I've done 2 of them. No, never again. It's horrible, for everyone, and it's never worth it. You can't make games that way. I would say the only exception is if it's an advert game. This was our learning from doing from a couple day and date movie games, is if you treat it as an advertising vehicle, maybe some hyper casual thing or something like that, where it doesn't have to be profitable in its own right. It's quick and easy, that sort of thing. For example, if I was working with DJ Marshmallow, that's how I would probably, for a lot of reasons, approach it. Let's just find something high quality, quick and simple, that's not going to be a profit vehicle within itself, and is just supporting our main business in some other way.
So before, and I hope we do have some audience questions, but before we go out for audience questions, one of the things, and this impacted me directly, one of the things that I hadn't sort of realized when we got into licensing, now this wasn't in Touch Press or Story Toys, but a previous venture, was you are effectively spending your own money to build somebody else's brand. That's one. Secondly, you lose a license, you lose significant value in your own business. So how do you make sure that you can protect your business if you're in a situation where a high percentage of your revenues are coming from a third-party license? How do you do that?
Diversify.
Okay, so which is what we've done. So we would have internal rules of thumb where we basically say we can't have I would be very worried if we had 25% of revenues coming from more than one license. So just try to spread it across. But the mistake we'd made in the past, we had actually a licensing deal with one of the major Japanese games companies, and we did very well with it. We did too well with it. So suddenly, okay, we're going to take this in-house now. Thank you very much for building our business. Happens.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I'm probably speaking beyond my expertise. I'm not an investment banker, but I think if too much of your revenue comes from licensing deals, which are ad hoc and under very much things that you can't control, it would be a long-term strategic risk. At least what I look for is I want to see a studio that has had previous success is scaling up the number of their teams, and they're like, well, we're making a bunch of stuff we really like, but there's a huge chance this is going to fall apart because it's all innovative and cool. But a licensed game, it's not exciting, it's not top 10 grossing, but it's a little bit more reliable. It's kind of like the bonds to counterbalance your stocks in a portfolio. When they have that kind of approach, I think it's a very healthy way to look at licensing.
Christian, any comments?
I used to be an investment banker. I can confirm that's a true assessment.
Well, in China's case, that when we license games, what we usually do will be mobile online games. So basically, what you sell is not the game product itself, but the service. It's a connected game. It's you need servers, you need customer service, you need events, you need operations. So basically, you have a lot behind the game itself, and it will need constant upgrade every month, every 3 months. So in the case you just mentioned, the IP licensor, of course, can come in and say, okay, we're going to take this in-house, thank you, bye-bye. But the game will be not the same game after they've taken over the game. The developer team will be the different. The servers, they will not be able to know how to operate the servers, and the kind of game events they do in the future will be different from previously. So it will be difficult for them to continue the success, presume it is success, before they take them. So that's one thing I would suggest, that not just a standalone game, but go online, go connected, need a server and everything.
Right,
that's one thing, yeah. And the other thing would be that you consider what's left behind before you actually develop the game. Because, like we discussed before, the IP will be a key point on the Longterm point that give you the first number of superfans and core users. But eventually, if the game is successful or not, still depending on the game's graphics, actions, animations, and growth chart, how the users will be enjoying the game. So the game itself is good or not is still a key point. So if those could be left, the technology, this know-how is left inside your company. One day you're doing a game without IP. If you can still produce a game that's good enough, your brand is there already. You can outgrow the IP and become your own brand. Yep. So I think, that's two ways to think of this.
Great.
Yep.
Any questions from the audience? We got one.
Hi, Arslan from Yuzu Games. Previously, you just mentioned about don't do movie games. What type of IPs do you think that has the highest potential in terms of gaming? That's one of my questions. I mean, is it like characters, books, or old games like Final Fantasy series? We had some examples. My second question would be like in terms of design, what are the challenges in designing IP games? Because I know the relationship between the IP holder and the developer is always like a challenge. Is it like easier from because you have the design of the IP, or is there any challenges in that design perspective?
In my opinion, for your first question, there's two parts. It's like big numbers, right? And then of those audience numbers, who are they? So like, for example, like Star Wars, these are big numbers, and these people can play games, right? A book, you might have a book with big numbers, but do they play games? If they don't, it might not be the best fit. I think to me, that's the one thing. Integrating it into the game is could be another constraint. As a game designer or game developer, you may have this perfect idea about how to integrate the IP into a game, but at the end of the day, the IP holders have to buy in on that, and they may make some changes, or they may have some constraints. And so what you end up finding is sometimes you have design constraints around your game idea that you have to work around, which could be kind of challenging. But it's really important, I think, if you have some IP, that the game that you have along with it makes a lot of sense. There are great examples of IP that someone just slapped IP on a certain type of game and thought it would do well, and it didn't, because there wasn't a lot of thought put into that. They just saw Kim Kardashian released a game, and so they wanted to do something similar, and it didn't do as well. So I think there are plenty of examples of IP not working well in games. Not a whole lot of. I think there's less examples of IP doing really, really well, and that's why you have these testing processes and things like this. But yeah, to answer your question, those the numbers, who are these people, and then the design constraints around the game based on the IP holder and then what the IP is.
Yeah, what he said. And as far as like working with them, depends on the brand. Some brands are, I don't actually know the best way to describe it. What I call it is prescriptive, right? So for The Simpsons, like the ratios between the hair and the eyes, like it's written in stone, right? Other brands, it's not. You know, you're welcome, and it's actually encouraged and kind of required for the team to kind of take it in their own direction. So depending on what type of brand it is and what type of company is, how much you're involved can really vary. Most of our developers keep creative control. We're only reviewing character assets, but not everyone does it that way. And actually, I would not say it's a 0% chance that, say this, we do this for 5 years, we get burned once, and then we have to go back and do it the other way, because you know an IP is such a valuable thing. You do appreciate the need to be super, super careful about it. But the more difficult you are, the harder it is to get good talent and good people to work with you. So it's a constant balance between the internal fear that we're going to ruin this big thing we built and the ever-going need to work with the best people in order to actually make use of the opportunity.
Any other questions? So I give the mic back to you. We have to conclude.
I think the one other, I mean, from my own experience, one of the things when you're looking at, if you're a smaller studio, beware of the licensing agent and beware of film IP as well. There's a couple of examples whereby, you know, if somebody is prepared to put their IP out with an agent as part of a broad portfolio, we got this, probably there's not much love within that IP, and probably it's going to be quite a difficult relationship to make it happen, to make a success of it. Film IP, all you need to do is look at Google Trends to see spike and down again. So unless it's, Star Wars has been mentioned a few times, unless it's Star Wars, unless it's like an evergreen or a long-term TV show, or in the case of DeNA, you know, something like Bleach, don't go there. Or unless you have massive listenership and audiences, or a long-term, even on platform, it's a very, very difficult process to make a success off what would be a one-hit wonder.
It's a good point about agents. I don't know. Maybe it's different for consumer goods and other sort of things, but the idea, like, I can imagine going to the office and being like, hey, we just, you know, let a bunch of people run around and try to figure this out? Like, I can't imagine that.
Yeah, the way I look at the film IPs and etc. is that if you look at IP, if that's good enough for making a game, is that how many core users are for them, and that will reflect in actually for each users that consume this IP, how many hours they actually spend on this IP. For example, film like IPs, you spend 2 hours on that, done. You like the game, but you only spend 2 hours on this IP, then it's over. But if it's an animation, say it's 10 episodes, right? Each one takes 1 hour. Then you have 10 hours consumed on this IP. For the longer run-in animations, say 10 years, 20 years, you basically grow with the IP. Of course, have large loyalty.
Engagement and immersion over time.
Yeah, engagement over time.
All right, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you for sticking it out in the heat today. I hope you found that useful. I'm sure we'll all be around for a few minutes if anybody has any questions that they didn't want to ask.